was a big DOS user back in the day. We had a kind of back a little bit further than that. We had an Apple computer. That was my first introduction to computing, and my brother and I taught ourselves to write programs on that Apple computer. But then we replaced that with an IBM PC, and I learned to program on that. Still, it was basic, but I became a real DOS user, I'd say, with that first 86, I think it was, and then we got the 286 and the 386, and I did everything in DOS because that was really what you had. And then I went to college, and I was a physics student, and I used DOS for everything. I mean, I wrote all my papers using a DOS word processor. A lot of you probably remember the WordPerfect word processor. I used that for a while, then I switched over to a shareware program called Galaxy Write. I did all my lab analysis in a DOS spreadsheet called As Easy As, which is a shareware spreadsheet equivalent to Lotus 123. As easy as 123, right? Do you get it?
Yes.
So I just did everything in DOS, including gaming. I would, there's just a ton of great DOS games, and I programmed little utilities here and there that would make my life easier in DOS, and I was just a sort of a power user. I had discovered Linux. But I still did most of my work in DOS. And then in 1994, Microsoft started doing all these press interviews and whatnot with tech magazines, and they said that the next version of Windows is going to completely do away with DOS. MS-DOS is dead. And I don't know if you remember what Windows looked like back in 1994. 94, ugly. That was Windows. Yeah, it was ugly. Windows 3.1. It was not great. And I remember saying, man, I just didn't use Windows because Windows 3.1 kind of sucked. But I remember saying that, if the next version of Windows, if Windows 4 or 3.2 is going to look anything like Windows 3.1, I don't want anything to do with it. And so I was still an undergraduate student, and I think in my naivete, I think I kind of looked at it and said, why can't we write our own version of DOS? And I think if I had waited a couple of years, if that had happened a couple of years later when I had a job and stuff and didn't have as much available time, I think that might have happened differently. But I said, man, I've been running Linux, and Linux is a full operating system, multitasking, and and everything else. And gosh, if the Linux people can do it, we can do something as simple as DOS, right? It's a single tasking operating system. We can do that.
Yeah.
I've written a number of utilities already. So I just said, let's just make our own DOS. And that's really how it started. I said something on Usenet. That was how you discuss stuff online at the time. And I said, does anybody else have a free DOS? Does anybody else want to write a free version of DOS? And the response was basically, that's a good idea, and you should do it. And so I did. And so I put something out there, and people liked it, and they, it was very crude at the beginning, but we got a lot of people that saw that there was something there, and they joined the project. And over the next couple of months, I don't know, we had a whole bunch of people who joined in and wrote a new command com and a new this and that. We scoured different FTP sites looking for free software. It was public domain stuff at the time. Stuff that would reproduce or actually enhance the behavior of MS-DOS. And that's kind of where it got started. Just people kind of come together and saying, yeah, we can give that a shot. We can make that work. And we did.
So do you ever look back and think, wow, if I just hadn't made that one choice back then, how many more spare hours I would have had in my life?
If it had been, I think it's like 6 months later when I had my first job, and I just would not have had the free time. And I think 6 months later, it would have been a different story. But I was a student with lots of free time, and I felt like I could do it all, and I gave it a try. Sometimes that's what you got to do. That's what I did.
The world is run by crazy people, and you're apparently one of them, and I appreciate that. So thank you. But just so we can bring the kids up to date, because I think there's probably some people here that don't realize the significance of what you were saying in terms of DOS being sort of your basic UI, back before they called them UIs even. Right. And then that Windows essentially had some version of DOS inside of it. It would run all the existing DOS programs. But then they were talking about getting rid of DOS in past the 3.1 phase. So when you were talking about DOS being in Windows, what is it you're interacting with there?
So DOS is a very old operating system. It's probably one of the oldest operating systems for the PC. CPM is a little older, but DOS as an operating system is a very simple operating system, and it's completely command line. Because DOS, when you look at it, it stands for Disk Operating System, because at the beginning it ran on floppies, and it was just intended to get you to run the computer so you could run applications, and that's kind of what DOS is really there to do. It's really there to start up the computer and let you run applications. It's you live at the command line. Well, you're intended to live at the command line. I think this is sort of the MS-DOS vision. You're intended to live at the command line long enough to start an application that you'll actually do the rest of your work in. And so the computer would boot up. It would be very text mode. You're going to see the C:\\/ greater than symbol. That's your prompt, right? C: is your drive, and / is the root directory of the C drive. And from there, you go into whatever directory you need to go into that has an application, and you just run the application. It's single tasking. So when you run that application, when you run WordPerfect, when you run Spreadsheet, when you run a communications program, that's all that's running. You're not multitasking. There's no multitasking in DOS. And so you are intended to run it one application at a time. There were some other bolt-ons like desk view and whatnot that did provide some multitasking, but as an operating system concept, DOS was really meant to be text mode, single user, single task, and just there to let you run an application. It had some command line utilities, so if you needed to do some work on the command line, like managing some files and whatnot, you could certainly do that. But the intention for most of your day-to-day work was really going to be just start an application and do your work there.
Can you explain something for me? Why is it the first drive always seems to be C:?
Well, it's actually because the first drive is A, and that's a floppy. And the original computers had floppy drives, and so you had an A drive and you had a B drive, because those are your first and second floppies. And then they added hard drives, and so the hard drive was the first letter after that, and that was C. And they said, well, it's letters, and by the time we get beyond having more letters than that, then we'll have figured something else out. But we're still 2017 now, and we're still using those letters. That's the staying power.